Going on? Welcome in the Matt Bernier Show, DRFTV, live.drf.com, livestream.com, Daily Racing Forms Twitter handle at DRF Inside Post, as well as the Daily Racing Forms Facebook page. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. This is the recap edition. Going back and taking a look at some racing action from opening weekend of 2019, really. We're going to take a look at some racing from January 5th and January 6th. Got some stuff from out at Santa Anita, Gulfstream Park as well. You have some 3-year-old races for the boys and the girls. Hopefully you'll see some potential Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks contenders. It's already that time of year. Derby and Oaks points are already out there and on the line to be had. If you listen to this thing in podcast like most of you do, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, as well as Spotify. If you're over on YouTube, click that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up. Make sure that bell icon is lit up and it doesn't have a line through it. That way you get everything that DRFTV has to offer. Also, if you're over on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, however you get your podcasts, write us a review, give us a positive rating. It's always greatly appreciated. We're going to kick things right off with the... I suppose, yeah, I mean, it is. It's a Derby prep because Derby points were awarded for this race. We'll start off out in Southern California with the Grade 3 Sham. 1 mile on the main track. You had a field of 7. Let's take a look at that field. Post-time favorite at odds of 3-5 on the heels of a very flashy debut effort. Coliseum for Bob Baffert and Godolphin. This is a big, beautiful son of Tappet that went out there and blitzed a field in his debut out at Del Mar going 7/8 of a mile. The concern there, twofold. From a price standpoint, not a heck of a lot there as far as value is concerned. And also, he got away with a pretty easy lead, all things considered. And then you also factor in, you hear some things, Baffert saying, oh, he's a bit of a work in progress. He's still learning. We've got to figure some things out. Joe Talamo, his rider, reiterated that. I suppose it at least opened up the door for you to take a shot against a horse like this. Ultimately, all of those things that the connections had brought up, they kind of came to fruition, and it opened up the door for someone else to come and take advantage. Here's the stretch run of this year's Sham.
To make up, top of the stretch, and much better is the leader. Gunmetal Gray with an eye-catching rally on the extreme outside. Sueño Coliseum still 5 off the lead. A 16th to run, and it's much better, clinging to a narrow lead. Sueño, Gunmetal Gray flying on the outside, and Gunmetal Gray, an eye-catching rally to win the Sham.
Gunmetal Gray rallies from last, finishes best of them all, gets the job done as the second choice at odds of 7-2 over Sueño. 18-1 shot in here for Kent DeSormo and Keith DeSormo, and the third place finisher, the other Baffert, much better with Drayden Van Dyke aboard at 7-1. The 3-5 favorite Coliseum off the board finishes 6th in a field of 7. Let's take a look at Gunmetal Gray. He's 2 of 5 lifetime, 3 times in the exacta, over $217,000 in career earnings. Owned by Hollendorfer LLC, Pearl Racing, and West Point Thoroughbreds. Trained by Jerry Hollendorfer. Bred by Lee Pokoik in Kentucky. Ridden to victory by Mike Smith. You can see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. He is by exchange rate out of an include mare named Class of 63. Now is the more sort of, let's say, sobering news with a horse like this. And nothing bad happened. But from a figure standpoint, this is not a spectacular effort from any of these horses, really, if we're calling it like it is. 82 buyer speed figure for Gunmetal Gray. It's not a bad effort by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not a strong effort. I think that would be going a little bit overboard. Now, Timeform US has not released any of their figures or any of their pace situation, but I look at this and I see that 46 and 4.5 mile. I don't think that's blistering, but at the same time, I think it's honest enough. And when you look and see that the horse from dead last came, and he was really the only one doing any running at the end, and even having said that, it's not like he was finishing with much oomph. He got his final quarter in 26:52. We're talking about a race that, for the most part, just completely disintegrated. And I don't know if you want to penalize Gunmetal Gray for that. I'm certainly not giving him points for it. I'm looking at it saying, okay, you finished the best out of a group that didn't really do much running at the end. I think he's a nice horse. Hollendorfer has brought up the idea that Mike Smith seems to think that he's a 1.25 mile kind of stayer. I agree with that. He gives off the impression that he'll stay a distance, but I just don't know how fast he'll do it. You know, we always talk about it. That final quarter in a race like the Kentucky Derby, again, 1.25 miles. The final quarter, if you can get it in 26 seconds, you're going to be in good shape. Well, that's when you're running your 10th furlong. Or I should say your 5th quarter mile. Not in a race like this where your final quarter of 4 of them is in 26:52. You're going to have to do a heck of a lot better than that if you're going to really be looking at a horse that could potentially be a player in May. Luckily, it's so early that we have plenty of time, and these horses can continue to develop and improve rapidly. But needless to say, I am not all that thrilled or impressed with what we saw from this race, the Sham, on Saturday afternoon. Sueño was a horse that looked like a bit of a long price and a long shot in here, and he ran really well in that race at Golden Gate most recently, but he needed to prove that he could do it on the main track. I suppose he ran fine. This was an inoffensive effort, but again, he came home in 27-22. I just have a hard time getting super excited about an effort like this from any of these horses. Going back to Gunmetal Gray really quickly, another reason that I'm not super thrilled with the finish, that final quarter mile, listen to his prior three quarters: 24:60, 23:49, 24:35, and then he comes home in 26:52. Those opening three quarters were not that fast, especially when you break them down incrementally. If all of a sudden we saw a middle quarter, whether it's the second or third quarter, and 23 flat, then maybe I'd give him the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, 23 and a half seconds for the second quarter and 24 and change for your third quarter. I just feel like he was the only one that stayed on at a mile distance, and that's not really a positive thing for any of these other horses. Much better to me. This was a tremendous disappointment from this horse. I picked him in here. I liked him a little bit. And turn him for home, he wins for fun. He wins for fun. And then all of a sudden, he starts lugging in. Drayden gets into him left-handed. He pops to his left lead, and he comes to a crawl. So oddly enough, I guess there's just so much about this field right now that I'm looking at. Gray Magician, we kind of knew. Look, he looked really impressive in his first start for Peter Miller, but it was only 2 starts ago. He was in for a tag, I believe. So I mean, we're not talking about a stellar group, and until we get to Coliseum, we'll talk about him in a moment. But I guess what I'm trying to say is this was not a spectacular race going in. You had the thought that maybe you had a potential superstar, or a potential star, I should say, for the 3-year-olds with Coliseum. But other than that, it felt like, okay, if you're going to go against him, you're doing it more so on the basis of him stubbing his toe, which in fact he did, and one of these other horses necessarily jumping up. Gunmetal Gray didn't really improve his speed figure standpoint. Who knows? Again, it's very early. I don't want to... It'd be foolish to write off any of these horses, but needless to say, I'm not all that impressed with what we saw at Santa Anita on Saturday. As for Coliseum, basically everything that could go wrong did go wrong. A little bit of Murphy's Law. Broke slow, which has been a problem for him in the mornings. After he breaks slow, he gets a little bit keen. Joe Talamo said that was exactly what happened with him rounding the first turn and onto the backside. He was very wide throughout. First time going 2 turns, first time facing winners. When Talamo sent him along on the far turn, he just he tried, but he didn't really do a heck of a lot of running. And I guess the way that I'm looking at it, I'm saying, you know what, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say, you know what, everything that could go wrong basically did go wrong for this horse in this race. But having said that, you're still going to need to do a heck of a lot better for me to really look at you in your next start and say this could potentially be a Derby contender or a Derby candidate. I'm very reluctant to look at this race right now and be too impressed with anything and look at it and say that perhaps we have Derby horses in here. Gunmetal Gray, again, he gets his 10 Derby points for winning this race, but at the same time, I just, I don't know. Needless to say, I'm not super thrilled with the Sham to kick things off. For what it's worth, Gunmetal Gray, they'd like to keep him in Southern California, but Hollendorfer's got some other prospects, and he said he's going to talk with the ownership groups and see what their next move is. If one of his other horses runs in the next race, the Bob Lewis, there's a scenario where Gunmetal Gray goes out of town, and that's where they run him in his next start. But we'll find out in time. At face value, this race, to me, very vanilla. I'd give it about a C for a grade. But it's so early, and these horses are still relatively lightly raced. They can all take steps forward. To me, if you're going to give anyone the benefit of the doubt, it's Coliseum. You got to hope that he just improves and continues to mature and put things together. But needless to say, this was not what the Connections had in mind for him. I thought this was a terrible loss for Much Better. And as far as Gunmetal Gray is concerned, look, he did what he was supposed to do. Smith took him back, let the pace heat up, came with his run, and he stayed on. He didn't finish brilliantly, but he stayed on, and he got the job done. Your winner of the 2019 Sham is Gunmetal Gray with an 82 Beyer speed figure.